Alex Howard and Lee Pugsley of the Dark Room podcast aim to advocate for the low vision community by giving listeners entertaining movie reviews and behind the scenes peeks of audio description, all while sharing how people with vision loss enjoy these art forms in an accessible way. Plus, they interview people from the vision loss community who work in the film and TV industry. Today, we're going to speak with Alex Howard all about audio description, his vision loss journey, and which movies to watch out for as awards season is starting to peak. I'm Grant Hardy. You're listening to The Pulse on AMI Audio. Alex, thank you so much for making the time. Really excited to talk to you today. And just to kick things off, I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about yourself and your career in entertainment.
Yeah, so I went to CSUN for cinema and television arts, and let's see, I started temping around Warner Brothers. So I worked at DC Comics for a year and a half before the pandemic, and then obviously with the pandemic, the
Mhm.
mailroom went away, so I stopped there. And then during the pandemic, I started identifying more as legally blind, which I probably should have before that, but they say that it takes a while to really start identifying as that. And so I started using audio description really full time during the pandemic. And I got into respectability, which is now disability belongs, but the respectability summer lab program for entertainment professionals with disabilities in 2020. And that really opened the door for me for working in entertainment in terms of the disability space. And I feel like I got really passionate about it during that. And so I started being on panels and different things about audio description. And so they gave me the opportunity to go to TIFF in 2023. Respectability did. So I did that. And that even opened up more doors. So now I've been consulting, doing accessibility consulting and all of that, and trying to make audio description just as commonplace as captions is. And I feel like there's a lot of work to be done, but it's definitely a thing I'm very passionate about.
Uh, Absolutely, lots of work to be done, and we'll be touching on audio description a lot. But I just wanted to ask you that, like, that's got to be what was that journey like switching from kind of like uh, uh, maybe the idea that you were going to be working in mainstream entertainment to becoming a part of the disability community and exploring that side of entertainment.
Well, I think it's kind of embracing. Um, Sorry, how do I say this? Um, it's kind of embracing my life perspective in a way. So
Mhm.
I feel like before, I mean, I was always passionate about development, and
Mhm.
that's what I wanted to work in was story development. And I feel like now, well, in a way, I mean, I'm not doing that anymore, but I am making it so that blind people can enjoy media just like I'm enjoying media, or trying to make myself be able to enjoy media that I can't right now as well. Um, and so in that way, it is very rewarding. The transition, it's almost like how I'm transitioning right now from a visual, not visual. Right now, I'm working on making it a visual disability as opposed to a non-visual disability. So before it was almost like I could walk around and people didn't know that I'm blind, but I
Mhm.
started using my cane more, and so now everyone knows that I'm blind. And so it's very much upfront and center, and I can't hide it at all. And so that journey has kind of been in parallel to my entertainment journey, which is interesting because in my entertainment journey now, when I meet people, I have my cane, and it's an
Mhm.
instant like, oh, interesting. This guy's in this space and he's blind. What does that mean? What does he do? It's almost like a conversation starter as well.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Definitely maybe changes kind of the roles maybe that people would expect you to be doing in entertainment, does it? But at the same time, it's kind of like an icebreaker or something that makes you memorable. Is that
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Um, what are some of the challenges of consuming films while identifying as legally blind? And do you feel that they've been mostly addressed for you, or is there so much work left to do that you still feel left out?
Well, I think mainstream wise, things are pretty good right now. They're pretty regulatory. Most of the studios do audio description. Most of the big five: Disney, Universal, Paramount, Sony, and oh my gosh, Warner Brothers. They all do audio description. But in terms of independent films and especially international films, there's a lot of work to be done. I feel
Mhm.
like as a movie buff, I'm not just limited to the studio films. In fact, I think I usually prefer the independent films over the studio films. And so there are a lot of films, even on the top tens of people that I follow on YouTube and other things this year that I couldn't watch, like Hundreds of Beavers. Everyone was talking about Hundreds of Beavers. I can't watch that movie because it doesn't have audio description. There's one called The Last Stop in Yuma County, which really
Mhm.
seems like a movie that's up my alley. It's like two bank robbers who stop at a gas station and they have to stay there for an hour, 2 hours, and people are finding out what they actually did. And I can't watch that movie. There's a movie Flow that won the animated best animated feature Golden Globe, and that doesn't have audio description.
Mhm.
Ironically, at my local theater, they had a giant standee, like a floaty for Flow, and I was like, why did they pay for this and not audio description? And
Yeah.
so it's like there's so many, especially international movies too. Like half the time, the entire international category I can't enjoy because there's no audio description. Luckily, I think All Quiet on the Western Front had it because it was a Netflix movie. But then Amelia Perez does not have it, even though it's a Netflix movie. So it's really like hit or miss when it comes to certain specialty movies. But I feel like that's where the disconnect is. And
Mhm.
honestly, those are the movies that usually have the biggest messaging, that have the biggest like impact, that ironically have the biggest like message of we need to be inclusive and showing people's different life experiences and different perspectives. And those are the movies that aren't accessible to a blind audience.
And how do you deal with that when there's a film that isn't accessible that you really would love to be able to watch? Do you just kind of put that aside, or do you try and get someone to like describe it to you, or what's kind of like that process?
Depending on the movie,
Mhm.
it's pretty rare that if I find out it has audio description, usually it's a big turnoff for me. So I'm just like, I'm not even gonna um give this movie the time of day. I'm gonna
Yeah.
boycott it. I don't want to give them money for not making it accessible. But there have been a few times where, for Terrifier 2 or something like that, where I'm like, I'm gonna go with a friend and have him describe it. But that's really hard because then we're talking during the movie, and people don't normally like that. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's
That's
just like usually sometimes I'll even wait for Pig. I waited for it to be on streaming and my friend described it to me at home. But usually I don't even want to count it in my top 10 for my podcast. I don't want to like people say it's good, then
mhm.
I'll really try and seek it out. But like I mean Parasite, I still haven't really fully experienced it. Like I went and saw it in the theater. There was no audio description. My girlfriend at the time, after each scene, she would summarize the scene to me, and that's how I watched the movie. But like, I really haven't experienced Parasite to its full capacity.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I grew up in the 1990s when audio description was so incredibly rare that kind of like almost the only option was to have someone, my mom or someone else describe the movie. But now, man, I almost want to say I'm spoiled, which is a terrible way of putting it because, as you said, there are massive quality categories of movies that still aren't described. But yeah, now it's kind of hard to go back to that and try and consume media if it's not described because you just feel like oh, I didn't see the, AD on the box on the label. I'm just going to move on to something else, and that just shows how much more work there is to do.
Yeah, I do have a friend that he is a blind movie critic, and he watches everything, even if it's not described, and then reviews it. And if it's not described, he'll usually talk about it on his YouTube channel, and then hope that people will see the importance of description. Whereas I'm just like, I'm not gonna watch it at all. So we do have different ways of going about it, but yeah, usually I don't even give it the time of day.
Yeah, I gotcha, and that's totally reasonable. You mentioned your podcast, and I'd like to get into that now. Can you tell me about the Dark Room podcast and what it is for those unfamiliar?
Yeah, so the Darkroom podcast is a podcast that me and my other legally blind friend Lee started together, and we go to the movies usually 100 times a year or over that number. And so we were just looking for a space where to talk about movies, but beyond that, to talk about the blind experience of going to the movies. And we feel like it really there's a disconnect between the YouTube channels and the podcasts that we listen to regularly, especially
Mhm.
for me, like that's where I got the ideas. I'm listening to all these movie shows all the time, and none of them talk about audio description. And sometimes they talk about something that I can't watch, or they talk
Mhm.
about a movie that I get excited for, and then it comes out and it doesn't have description or something like that. And so I feel like there was a space missing where um for blind movie audiences and blind movie fans, and that does exist. And so Lee and I created this podcast to we don't just talk about audio description. We call it a podcast for film lovers of all abilities, but we do always try and bring it back to that. We actually just recorded our top 10 movies of the year, and when we would talk about them, we would say this movie is available to stream with audio description on this platform. So we really try and emphasize that, but we don't try and make it just about that because we do like aspects of movies beyond audio description too.
Totally. And do you feel that your journey, like, not only being present at so many movies, but hosting this kind of show, do you think it brings more attention kind of to the mainstream and the audio description realm, and why we need to make more movies accessible?
I mean, I really hope it does. We do a lot of interviews with audio describers. I mean, I always tell them when they're on the show that they're kind of like celebrities to us, the blind audience, because
Totally.
we're literally like listening to them the whole movie. And so we really try and promote it and all of that. I think our
Mhm.
biggest pop was the audio description roundtable we did last year. We're gonna do another one this year. It's funny. I'm kind of taking what Hollywood Reporter and Variety does on their YouTube channel and
Mhm.
doing a twist on it for our podcast. So for our Oscars roundtable, we did we had 6 Oscar-nominated movies, so we had writers and narrators from various Oscar-nominated movies on our, show at the same time. So it's like a 90-minute show, and just ask them questions related to their movie and, how it felt to see this movie be so successful, but in a way, it also lifts them up too. And so we really try and stick with what's popular right now and try and bring AD into the conversation to hopefully people will discover it in their search for that thing and then make AD more commonplace.
Yeah, that's really cool. And talking about the future, maybe doing another uh, roundtable coming up. But what are some of the award nominated movies, for the Oscars that you're really excited about?
So we just did our top 10 yesterday. Funny enough, both of our this is pretty rare, but both of our favorite movies are pretty much guaranteed for Best Picture. His Lee's favorite movie was Wicked of the year, and my favorite movie was The Substance of the year. He's the musical guy on the podcast, and I'm the horror guy on the podcast.
Ah.
And so, The Substance is my favorite audio description track of the year for sure. It is an bonkers, insane movie, but the audio description track is just as bonkers, which is what I really love. Like if I'm watching a rated R body
Hmm.
horror movie, I want my audio description to be rated R and just go for it. Like, I'm not in that movie if I'm not ready for the gore. And so the audio description should match, the movie. It shouldn't tone it down
Hmm.
because I'm a child or something like that. So, I really love the Substance audio description. Wicked also has a very challenging audio description track because they had to describe during the songs, and it was just I am not jealous of the person who had to write that track because that must have been so hard to balance that, but they did a really good job on that too. Um, a Real Pain is another one. A Real Pain I actually watched at Sundance with audio description, so that was really cool. So that's had it for almost a year now. I'm going to Sundance next week again, and I always limit myself to only movies with AD because I don't want to get half a film
Yeah.
when I go watch it. Um, Let me see. What are
W-
some of the other? Oh yeah, Amelia Perez obviously doesn't have it, so that's not one. But The Brutalist I think was my other favorite. The Brutalist and Dune Part Two are my other favorite AD tracks that are probably going to be nominated for Best Picture. They are gorgeous movies, and the audio description really was great for both of those.
Okay. So I want to ask you, and I know you have touched on this a little bit, but what would you say is the difference between kind of like a good or maybe a lacking audio description track, especially if there are really subtle, either visual cues, horror stuff, kind of like cultural, visual commentary on cultural issues, whatever it is? Like, what makes a stellar AD track?
So I think for a good AD track, it has to give the blind audience the same experience that a sighted audience would have. So whether that be for gore or for a big one is physical comedy. I think there's a movie called Thelma that a lot of people really loved from this year, and I saw it at Sundance last year, and I
Mhm.
was in a huge auditorium, like the iconic auditorium in Sundance when I saw it, and I was in the front row, and the AD track just did not match
Mm.
the tone. Like there were moments where the audience was laughing and I didn't know what they were laughing at. And so I felt very like left out, almost like imposter syndrome kind of thing. And so it really has to capture the same experience that you would have watching it as a sighted person.
Yeah, that's kind of the worst, isn't it? Is when especially everyone is reacting kind of like, or, very emotionally, and you're kind of like, okay, I kind of know like literally what happens, but like the way they're describing it is just not like doing it for me emotionally in the same way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think
Mhm.
it's it should be just as shocking, it should be just as funny, it should be yeah, like, you should be getting the same experience. And if it is hard, sometimes with horror, you know, they're screaming or they're yelling something when something pops out, so they do it before, they do it after, which is fine, like, you need to work it in when you can.
Yeah.
But I think one of the best examples of AD is I always tell people The Mandalorian on Disney Plus has outstanding audio description. I think it really captures the like I mean, I'm a big Star Wars fan anyway, but they really go into the Star Wars vocabulary and just knowing the creatures and it really gives you I think one of the best AD experiences.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really important. Is kind of having a description that reflects the subject. Um, So I just want to talk about a couple of things quickly. First of all, can you talk about the fight for AD? Like, why is it so hard? I feel spoiled for having some movies in audio description now. Why do you think the fight's been so hard? Even just getting access to audio description that's maybe on one platform, but it's not on another platform. Like, what can be done? I don't know to fix this issue.
So I think there are so many places we could go with it. Like for cinema, I think it's really, really important to make sure the staff and everyone knows how the devices work. I mean, Lee and I are a big, big advocate for the theater. I think being blind can be such an isolating disability.
Mm,
And so having that communal experience in the theater and having a good AD track to have like the same experience as everyone around you is so important.
mm.
And so I feel like the theaters where I'm emphasizing a lot of my time, but beyond that, making sure the track travels to Hulu or I'm calling out Hulu a little bit, travels to Peacock, everywhere that it goes. I mean, Alien, I saw Alien, the first one, in theaters this past year with AD, and it was magical. I was like, I've never seen this movie with AD before. It was awesome.
Hmm.
And now it's on Hulu without the track, and the track is nowhere to be found. And I'm like,
Yeah.
where is it? And so it's really frustrating to have. That's why I go to the theater a lot, because half the time it's in the theater and not on streaming. And then I think it's really, really important to have it. I don't know how to do this, but have it be where the track is a public property. Because right now, a lot of times,
Yeah.
the track is owned by Netflix or it's owned by whoever made
Yeah.
it, and it's licensed. So then other people can't use it. But I don't think that's really fair to blind people.
Yeah, that's the worst. There were so many, especially like where a show would maybe be accessible, a TV show, in the UK maybe, but in Canada, the States, you got nothing. I think there was
Exactly.
a blind person that actually put some of those tracks up just to benefit others, but obviously not really in a legal way. But I mean, what? You're just not going to watch it?
Yeah. And
That's
then when it's like that, we can't really talk about it on the podcast because it is not legal. You're right.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so, yeah, we need it in an accessible. And then it's like you're encouraging blind people to pirate, and like you don't want
mhm,
to do that.
mhm.
So, yeah.
Um, we're getting short for time, but I'm wondering if you can comment on disability representation in the media. Do you think we're at least like trending in the right direction?
We're doing a lot better. I think between Wicked and A Different Man and even Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, we're doing a lot better. But I think there is a long way to go, especially in terms of blind people. Like there's a lot of deaf people represented. There's a lot of people in wheelchairs represented, but I feel like I never really see blind people still in media. I think
Mhm.
Daredevil's kind of opening the door, but it's still not authentic casting,
Yeah.
which I mean, it's kind of impossible to have authentic casting for Daredevil. But even so, like, it would be great to have, a Friday the 13th of the blind person, anything would be great. So, I think there is still a long way to go, but definitely trending in the right direction.
There is like so much more we could talk about, but I think we got to wrap up here. So check out the Dark Room podcast, folks. And Alex, thank you so much for coming on the Pulse. Next Monday, January 20th, I have an exciting opportunity to interview Dolly Lewis and Agam Darshi from the popular CTV show Sight Unseen about their show's role in advocating for the disability community and the representation of the blind and low vision community on network television. We're looking forward to that interview, and I hope you'll listen in on Monday, January 20th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio. You can find the Pulse wherever you get your podcasts and a video podcast edition on YouTube. We release new episodes on Monday and Wednesdays every week and feature advocates from across the disability community who want to talk about issues that have big impacts on the community. Thanks again to Alex Howard for joining me today. I'm Grant Hardy. Thank you for listening to The Pulse.